Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest JHR Indigenous Reporter Program webinar series, supported by RBC Future Launch and sponsored by APTN National News. Today, we have an amazing panel of journalists and experts here to talk about mental health for Indigenous journalists. Also today, you should see a link to a survey on your screen right under the video. We would really appreciate it if you could take a few minutes at the end of the webinar to fill it out, as your feedback helps us keep doing this important work. The survey itself is anonymous, and completing it gets you a $5 Tim's card. Now, without further ado, I'll turn things over to our moderator, Brandy Morin, an award-winning French, Cree, and Iroquois journalist from Treaty 6, who has written extensively about the challenges facing Indigenous journalists and the importance of their ongoing work.
Thaniki, Sarah, Tanse, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this important conversation on mental health and self-care in the media. I'm really proud to share our panelists for today. First off, we have Mira Selva. She's the Deputy Director of the Reuters Institute and Director of their fellowship programs. Mira is an accomplished senior journalist with experience in Europe, Asia, and Africa. She is the Deputy Director of the Reuters Institute, and her recent work includes studying how the pandemic has affected journalists' mental health. Welcome, Mira. We also have Anna McKenzie. She is a child welfare reporter for Indigenous. Anna is a Pasquak Cree reporter with Indigenous, covering child welfare on so-called Vancouver Island. We also have Leonard Monkman, reporter with the CBC Indigenous. Leonard is Anishinaabe from Lake Manitoba First Nation. He's a reporter with CBC's Indigenous unit and has been with them for 5 years. We also have Adeline Bird. Adeline is an Afro-Ojibwe author, broadcaster, and director, and a member of Rolling River First Nation. She's a freelance host at Sportsnet and wrote Be Unapologetically You, a self-love guide for women of color. Again, it's amazing to have all of you join today. I'm going to start with Mira. So, Mira, you in July, I believe, of 2020, you co-authored a survey by the Reuters Institute, surveying journalists from around the world, I believe, to find out how they're coping doing their jobs during the pandemic. So in the study that you found, the majority of the respondents suffer from some levels of psychological stress and distress, and 26% of them have clinically significant anxiety. And so 11% reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Were you surprised by these findings?
Yeah. Surprised? Yes, I think the survey was interesting in two ways, that it had a very high response rate for this kind of survey, 63%, which told you something, which told you that people wanted to talk about it and people wanted to get their stories out there. And the other thing it told you, and the reason we kind of basically rushed the study out very quickly, because what we also found was that there were things at that stage that newsrooms could do. So we found that therapy, we also found that the journalists who were offered access to counselling had much better outcomes. So it wasn't just a kind of bleak story. We worked with Professor Anthony Feinstein, a psychiatrist who's worked on the issue of mental health amongst journalists. So he had an idea that this was a serious problem. So we weren't surprised, and I wouldn't say we were gratified, because it was not a pleasant finding, but it was in line with what we had been expecting.
So one of the links that was found there was that all the reporters there are working on this pandemic story that impacts them directly. So as Indigenous and Black journalists, this is something that we experience whether it's a pandemic or not. So we're mostly reporting on traumatic, high stress stories, and they affect us. They've affected us, for years. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a very significant story to be told in the fact that many journalists in our survey were experiencing what Indigenous racialized journalists experience, which is you report on a story that affects your community and your family and yourself very directly. So you have had the fear and the anxiety and the uncertainty and the stigma sometimes that you're reporting on happening to other people. So how do you both maintain an objective tone and hold a deep breath and kind of go, I can do this, I can do this. It's important that I do this, I don't fall apart. And it's a really difficult scenario. Absolutely. And the other thing we found is specifically in relation to COVID-19 is that, ethnic minorities were being hit harder in Britain, certainly, and I think much of the world than much of the rest of the population. And you saw this in the medical sector. The first doctors to die in Britain of COVID were hospital doctors from South Asian descent, very, very commonly. So there's this kind of growing awful realization that not only is this a global story and a global tragedy, but your communities are being hit really hard. It is really terrible. And the other issue that's spoken about to some extent is this concept of moral injury, so that you're reporting on a story and you can't take the actions that you would normally take. So you're reporting on someone who's being beaten by police officers, or you're reporting on someone who can't hug their mum in their dying days. And your normal action as a human being would be to try and either protect someone or facilitate a meeting or, do something. And you can't as a reporter, partly because it's against it, it's not what you can do in your job, but also the circumstances in this case forbid it. And that in itself creates kind of stress and anxiety and a whole host of issues.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I want to go to Adeline. So you know what it's like from both ends, being Afro-Indigenous. You kind of have, this double impact. What do newsrooms need to understand about the BIPOC reporting experience?
Mostly that it's much more complex than a lot of their policies sometimes, and then it's not always easy to tell these stories, and that when you have connections with community, there's certain responsibilities, and it's one of those things where I'm still trying to find the words for it. I'm still trying to figure out what that is. And I find writing to be really helpful for that. But I'm still figuring that out. And I really wish that more newsrooms held space for when those big stories come out. When they launched the inquiry for MMIWG, it would have been nice to have a couple of days off after that release, because that's heavy. It's heavy to be in a room where the TVs constantly are playing those things over and over again. You got radio playing it. It's all over the place. It could be really daunting.
Absolutely, I agree. I just finished up my last chapter this week on an extensive series that I am doing with Al Jazeera English. It's a 6-part chapter. Each chapter is 3,000 to 5,000 words. And we went to northern BC to report there in early February. And it was the heaviest story series that I've ever done. And I think maybe it's a combination of the pandemic and the extensiveness of the story and the stress and all that kind of stuff. And I definitely need a break. As much as I want to go and do more, I need to take that break. So Leonard,
paid break that, because I feel like rest.
I wish, but we're freelance. So that doesn't necessarily apply. It would be amazing. It would be great, but you got to make up for it.
Yeah.
So how has it been for you, Leonard? So how have you been dealing with, the stress of the pandemic, or even, reporting about your communities in general? How do you combat that stress? What is it like?
I think for me personally, I had a really hard time adjusting to working from home last year. I think when the initial outbreaks were happening in Canada, there was a lot of stress and anxiety that came with it, like not knowing what's going to happen, how long is this going to be here, what are the adjustments from, when you think about how radical the changes that happen in our lives within, from March to April were like very drastic, right? And that was a big adjustment period. And as somebody I pride myself on being tapped in and watching all the conversations that are happening across social media, in person, wherever, like just being overly consumed by news. And that had an effect on me where I was like, okay, like I need to pull back from watching the national. I need to pull back from reading all of the COVID related stuff. And just kind of recognizing that part where it's like, okay, like I need to compartmentalize where I'm seeing the information and how I'm taking in that information. And, trying to push through, going back to what you and Adeline were talking about, like capitalism doesn't allow for us to fully feel what we need to feel. It's like, we're going through stress, we're going through anxiety, we're going through grief, we're going through all of these different emotions. And it's like, you have to go to work tomorrow. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do your job, or you're not going to be able to pay your bills in a lot of instances. Right. And so we don't have that time to actually feel what we're feeling and just go through it like we normally would. And so that's one of the bigger barriers. And then also over the last little while, like I think February, I think I just started to feel really differently. I was like, oh shit, like I'm kind of in my own space. I'm not really like, I'm not feeling like myself. It is weird would be the best way to describe how I was feeling. Like it felt like everything was off. And then I started to feel like, March was an incredibly busy month for me. It was probably the busiest month that I've had in 2 years. And all of this is being done from home, right? And that kind of stuff catches up to you where it's like work. And then on top of that, it's like family issues. I've got, things that are happening to my kids where they're trying to maintain their own mental health issues on top of, family conflict. Like my family leans on me a lot and they're still going through a lot of shit. And so it's trying to balance out all of that. And then recognizing that, how much of an impact does social media play on my own mental health, where, there's so many conversations that are happening and the pressure to say, how come you're not saying anything about this particular topic, or how come you're not, and it's like, shit, man, like I'm just trying to make sure that I'm maintaining my sanity in this one spot. And I know that when I come out on the other end of it, I'll still be there, right? I'll still be the person that I need to be for myself and for my family and for my community. But like recognizing where those breaks need to take place and saying, you know what, like for my own sanity, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to play NHL 21 for 3 hours. And, I'm going to go for a walk and I'm not going to feel guilty about it.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's recognizing that where, even last year, the last 5 years, like I'm going to start conversations and people are going to jump in and debate each other. Over the last year, I'm like, you know what, like people have gone through so much shit collectively that I don't want to add into anyone arguing. And like, I'm not even going to get into arguments online anymore because like, I just need to protect my own mental health.
Wow, it's so powerful. And then you talked about feeling guilty. I don't know about you all, but I feel guilty when I feel like I'm not doing it all because I specifically report on Indigenous stories. I feel that if I don't do them, other people aren't going to do them because there's so few of us. I feel like there's just this huge expectation and responsibility on us, and you want to fulfill that. You want to be able to do that and give voice to our people and showcase, different things. But when it becomes too much, you carry that guilt. And Leonard, I heard you had to just separate yourself from that, and let it go when you thought you weren't doing enough.
And yeah, it's a difficult balance, right? Like I want to be tapped in. I want to see the conversations that are happening in real time, but it's just, I over the last little while, it's been stressful. There's been pandemic fatigue. There's been burnout. I'm trying not to like completely hit a wall where I feel completely burnt out. And so recognizing that I need to take breaks in between these times, right? And who knows, like June or July or August, maybe I'll feel better about it. Yeah. And just kind of recognizing when I need to take a break without feeling guilty about it.
Yeah. So Anna, you've been a journalist for about a year now, and you work at Indigenous, which is a revolutionary organization with the things that you and your team are doing. So Indigenous incorporates a decolonial like way of operating in the newsroom, and your experiences there have been really, really good. Can you tell us a little bit about how things work?
Absolutely. So the pandemic came about just as I was coming off of 1 year maternity leave. So I had a baby and I was at home. So there wasn't a lot of initial changes for me because I was at home anyways. And, I have stepchildren and we had to adjust in that way. So that was challenging, but re-entering, working full time as a mom, as a new mom, had its challenges, but I felt really privileged to have Emily Gilpin, our managing editor, as well as Lindsay Sample, reach out to me with a potential position with Indigenous as a child welfare reporter. And I don't have a formal background in journalism. I did a degree in First Nations and Indigenous Studies at UBC and have spent most of my working life working with Indigenous youth in foster care. So I have that frontline lens, and they were like, don't worry, just come on board and we'll teach you like the journalistic style. We just want your lens and your connection to community. And it's been really fabulous. Like every Wednesday we have some kind of training, whether it's with the Journalists for Human Rights or Brandy, you came on initially, and Leonard, you've come on and chatted with us. So we've just kind of been, thrown into the deep end, which has had its challenges for sure. I've had like a lot of self-doubt, and also reporting on child welfare issues on Vancouver Island can be just like heart-wrenching, devastating. So I've had to be really careful with my spirit and be able to have a balance, sharing stories in a good way, highlighting the good that's happening in our communities, as well as the challenges that we're experiencing. And our newsroom, it's funny, like I've only met a couple of my colleagues in person a number of times. For the most part, our newsroom has been entirely online.
Yeah.
So Mondays, we definitely, we connect in our newsroom, and we hold space for talking about our weekends, talking about our kids. Some of my colleagues participate in ceremony over the weekend. So we hold that space for each other to talk about things that are going on in our lives. Similarly, if there's, a big, something big happening in the news, like we're Indigenous reporters. So Joyce Echequan, when that was happening in the news, like we were all gutted, and we brought that into our newsroom and had space for each other to talk about it, and then came up with a plan how we wanted to shapeshift our newsroom to honor her life and to tell stories related to Indigenous women's experiences in the healthcare system.
That's something really rare that you have. Like I said, it's revolutionary. So I applaud Emily, your editor, and everything that's going on there. So Mira, I was wondering, how can newsrooms better support journalists right now? Whether they're BIPOC journalists or journalists dealing with anxiety, and stress from the pandemic.
I think the very practical thing is make sure there is counselling available, and that counselling is made available, and there's buy-in from the top. So senior editors, senior leaders are both seen to both endorse the services and also use them, which is the crucial thing. Make sure that, everybody who needs counselling uses it at all levels. That's the kind of very practical thing, but I appreciate that's both expensive and something that only really works in kind of larger, in newsrooms, which a lot of freelancers don't necessarily have the access to.
Mm-hmm.
I think on a very, very, very practical note as well, just accept the time pressures people are under and the health pressures people are under. What we're trying to say is, the idea of coming into work when you're feeling under the weather or feeling that calling in for a sick day is somehow going to be detrimental to your career or get you moved off a story, that has to stop. We've had a pandemic that proves that this attitude is not only unproductive, it's just downright dangerous. So just complete mind shift in how we deal with this issue of health, and ill health is something that comes to us all in different ways. Some of it is physical ill health, some of it is mental ill health, a recognition that frequently now the two are linked. And so you can't deal with one unless you deal with the other, and conversely, dealing with one will help you deal with the other. I think you'll get a lot, if you prioritize people's physical well-being, you're also essentially also prioritizing their mental well-being and vice versa. So I think those kind of mind shifts. And then the other one it's about diversity in the newsroom, because you've all spoken a great deal about how you feel under pressure in certain circumstances, and what you need is enough of us in the newsroom to have a voice. And you need senior people to be diverse and to represent these communities as well, because that's where the decision making and the power structures ultimately are going.
That might take a while, because I see that there are a lot of new and mid-level journalists of color, but there's not a whole lot that are ready for that responsibility, right? So it might take a while to make that shift, but it's definitely important. Now, I was wondering, are conversations around mental health in the newsroom, are they quite new?
No, because we all know the stereotype of a returning war correspondent probably with an alcohol problem, a failing marriage, issues over anger. And everyone knows that these are mental health issues. And this is a stereotype of correspondents that have existed for decades. So mental health problems in the newsroom are certainly not new, and an awareness of them are not new. What's different is the profile of people experiencing trauma is changing, partly because different kinds of people are going out to war zones, partly because of the barriers to entry to go out with a camera. It's lower, you can get more people. And also because the front line is changing. So now there are riots, there are, the hospital wards, the streets, the streets that you live in can be where the front line is and where you kind of experience danger and trauma. So all these reasons, and then social media brings on another kind of front line, what you see on social media, and also a lot of abuse that women and people of color often receive on social media, journalists included. So there are lots of kind of places where you come into conflict in the course of your reporting. So I think there's kind of an awareness that more people are experiencing danger in their work as a journalist, and the type of people who are experiencing this danger is also changing.
But your survey saw that more and more journalists want to talk about this and want to access the resources to deal with it.
Yes, I mean, our survey was a survey of large international news organizations. So these are journalists who are aware that their employers have the resources and the ability to provide counseling, and have, to be honest, some level of a safety net. Like they're not, they have, usually most of them have a kind of regular paycheck or a regular gig, which is again a massive privilege, I know, these days. But in that context, yes, there was a sense that people wanted to talk about it. They wanted solidarity, they wanted understanding, and then they wanted access to professional services, professional counseling and therapy as well.
Yeah. So Leonard, what specifically are you doing to stay healthy, and how did you go about implementing or discovering that for yourself?
From a mental health perspective, I do think like the knowing when to disengage part has been really important to me. Last year, sometime I implemented my own rule where it's like, I'm not going to argue with people online after 10 o'clock, right? Like I'm not going to engage because like I'm going to go to sleep pissed off, and I'm going to wake up pissed off, and I'm going to feel shitty about it. And it's like, okay, like I'm not doing that anymore. And then that kind of shifted over to last year to like, I'm not even engaging with people where I'm even getting into fights online, right? Because the social media realm has gotten so polarized over the last 4 years. And, we've been lucky to not have as many arguments as there have been, over the last couple of months, And so from that personal perspective, like, another personal social media rule that I have is like, I'm not going to engage in online debates where I can't fully say what I want to say. And so if I'm going to say something, I'm not going to let you one up me if I can't really say what I want to say. So therefore, I'm not going to engage. And that's, I see so many people arguing about vaccinations, about politics. And I'm like, you got to be able to learn when to protect your own energy, right? Like at the end of the day, we're all on lockdown, or a lot of us are in places where there's restrictions. And, you have to be able to, take these into consideration. And so here we just finished going into another 3-week lockdown, which started last week. And for me, we have a dog that's 5 months old, and being able to leave the house almost every single day, where it's like we're leaving for a short walk during the workday, and then after work we'll go out for a walk for an hour and a half, right? And that's been like hugely beneficial to my mental health, just to be outside. We're not on the phone, we're with the dogs, we're getting a break from the work, we're getting out and feeling the sunshine. And so a lot of it is sort of knowing when to disengage from the things that occupy our mind, but also being outside and being able to enjoy the sun.
Definitely, thank you. So I wanted to share, I have found the past year since the pandemic has broke up personally to be like the hardest year that I've experienced as a journalist, even though I've been doing high stress stories for years. So I have felt that, uptick. But last summer, when George Floyd was murdered, there was so much going on around the world with the protests, and so much talk in the media about racism. I was doing a lot of, work in that, whether I was commentating or writing or reporting on it. There was this high level of, there was this vibration that I think that was felt across the board, that everybody, it was very, very intense. And it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. At the same time, I was sent out on several back-to-back stories that were, again, high stress. And I went to this one territory in northern BC. I was at Wet'suwet'en territory. And before I left, I was advised by a former manager or former editor of mine, who's now like a mentor, to go and buy myself a gas mask in case something were to go down there, because it was around like pipeline protests and stuff. And just going and doing the act of buying this gas mask was really traumatic in itself, because it's this physical representation of us being in danger. And I find, even as an Indigenous woman, when we're out on the job, we feel more in danger as it is, because we are susceptible to being targeted for violence. So I went out there on this story, and I was there for a couple of weeks. But again, the story that I was reporting on there was also really, really intense. And it affected me so much that I started having nightmares in my hotel room. I was waking up in like sweats with my heart racing, and I stopped not sleeping well. And this carried on after I left for several weeks, and I got sent to more stories, and I wanted to do them. I was very passionate about doing them all, but I actually had to go to my doctor and get prescription sleeping pills in order to sleep through the night, because it was affecting me. So when Mira was saying like the mental health and the stress is very linked to the physical, and if you're not taking care of that, it's gonna it's going to do you a lot of harm. And I had to force myself to take 2 weeks off after that. And there's still been times, since then, where I have felt similar. But I just wanted to share that with you to see maybe what your feedback is on that. And specifically, like, Adeline, what has your experience been, and like what keeps you grounded, especially lately?
Therapy.
Yes.
I just learned that Indian Affairs offers like 22 sessions or 60 sessions now for counseling or therapy. But therapy has been like my savior of all, because for me personally, I have my foot in so many different things that sometimes there's certain things that happen within our community that explode. It's this big thing. And I can't always be talking to other community members about these things, because they're going through the response of certain things. And so I'm like, okay, we can't be putting this weight on each other. And so what I found really helpful is going to therapy, unpacking that with somebody outside of our community, or not the community essentially, but outside of the industry, I should say, outside of the industry, who can possibly see things that I don't see. Because sometimes I get mad, you know, and I
Oh,
say
yeah.
that I probably shouldn't say. But yeah, it's, you know, it's, for me, it's really just figuring it out. It's not every day that I'm the most focused. It's not every day that and I accept that. There's days where I get up and I'm like, okay, Adeline, you're not going to be able to do anything. Like yesterday, that was my day. There was some news that came out and I was like, okay, this is just taking all my energy. I accept that. And I'm just going to go sit in the sun all day. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what I did. So it's even just giving myself permission, you know?
Yeah. No, exactly. And doesn't it feel like freeing to be able to openly express and talk about it rather than trying to pretend like you have everything together?
Yeah, because people think that about me. They think I have it together. I'm like, no, I don't. I'm a crazy woman.
No, and that's why I think this is so great that we're having public discussions such as this, right? Because this is real life. We're human beings. A lot of times we're taught, people that go to journalism school or, learn the standard, that we're supposed to be disassociated, robotic, objective, but we're human beings. And I don't think that any of us will ever be unaffected by stories that we cover. And Anna, I was just wondering, can you share what it's like to carry the weight of the difficult stories? So for instance, like for me, I find that I'm really quite impacted by the stories because, again, most of them are very trauma and intense, high stress stories. But I find that after I get them out, after they're done or written or whatever, that I kind of like release them. And I feel that relief after that. That's how I deal with that. But what is it like for you to carry the weight of the stories reporting on child welfare, which is a crisis happening here in so-called Canada?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really resonates with me, Brandy, hitting the publish button and getting it out into the world. And, we sit with stories, and in the child welfare space, I'll often sit with some really, really challenging stories. And that's been hard for me. It's not new for me hearing about hard stories, but I feel, like you said, sort of a responsibility to hold on to the story, recognize the story, carry it in a good way, write it, which is cathartic for me. And then sharing that with the world, and sharing the weight of that is really, really helpful for me. But also, like you said, it's we can't separate our lived realities and lived experiences as Indigenous peoples from the stories that are coming into our inboxes, or the story pitches that we get, or what we hear and see in community. So it has been incredibly challenging. I have recently started seeing a therapist, finding out that there's funding through the First Nations Health Authority here for intergenerational survivors of residential school. That's something that's in my family. But I mean, yeah, it's been a really, really difficult year. So another thing that I like to do is to uplift the good that's happening. And when I started at Indigenous, we did like a broad community outreach, and I just made some calls and connected with some youth workers, with some delegated Aboriginal agencies, and with youth, and asked, how do you want to see Indigenous reflect the stories that are going on here in Vancouver Island? And what I heard was that there needed to be a reflection of what is happening, but also the good that's going on. So
Absolutely.
We did that story with Angela Starrett on how she takes care of her spirit. We just recently did a Q&A with Top Chef Canada contestant Siobhan from Cowichan Tribes, and she is just phenomenally strong. So it's a real balance. But I have to say, the birth alerts investigation that we did, like ravaged my spirit as a mom, as somebody that birthed in hospital. So it's taken me a long time to, and I'm still reconciling with it because I still feel the weight of it, and the messages that people sent to my email, and some of the images that I got and the information I got around that. And yeah, it's really, really difficult.
Yeah, it can be. So what other things do you do personally to take care of yourself? Do you say put attention to, exercise or eating healthy, or what are some things that you find that helps to keep your mental health good, and the way that you feel physically?
Yeah, I set intentions every week, and I do my best to just keep my head above water. I'm a mom of 3, so my priorities, caring for myself, haven't always come first. So I'm shifting that. I have been shifting that, and carving out some more time just for myself, whether that's, an hour after everybody goes to bed with a big bowl of popcorn and just rip through a show on Crave. I've been watching Insecure. I really like that show. I also got a pandemic puppy, so we have this dog that takes her walks. I live right by the water, so my mom, who lives with us, encourages me to get out for a walk every single day. And yeah, sleep is really, really important. What I'm eating, I'm constantly looking at, at things to be eating to fuel my body and to fuel my family's bodies. So yeah, I do my best to set intentions at the beginning of the week, and don't always, hit the mark on everything, but I have been easy on myself when I don't check all the boxes. And yeah.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you. So, Adeline, I just want to ask you, so there's a lot of different stresses that come with our job. So you'd like to see more journalists of color in the newsroom. This is something that I've been hearing for a long time now from so many people, whether it's from BIPOC journalists or editors, saying we need more, we need more. But why is it important, and how do you think it could be done? How do you bring in more? How do we attract more people to get into this, industry?
That's a good question. I think creating more capacity is really important. I recognize how a lot of the times it's up to us to do that. That's what it ends up falling on. It ends up falling on the communities that the people come from, having to create that our own space. But yeah, I think creating more capacity is definitely one. I feel like, when Leonard mentioned, he's been, getting that paid training, we need more of that. That's really important as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm always weirded out by when people tell stories from other communities. I'm like, how and I get sometimes, it's going to happen, but I would love to see more people from those communities reporting on these communities. When the Asian hate was starting to happen, I would have loved to hear from the Asian community more than, the white community, essentially, about what was happening. So I just feel like when certain things happen within our society that are critical, I would rather hear from those people who come from that community.
So have you ever been told by an editor or news organization that you shouldn't be reporting on your own communities? Because I have. They've said, you shouldn't be reporting on Indigenous stories because you're Indigenous. Well, I'm like, well, then you can't just send a non-Indigenous person on to a non-Indigenous story, or a Black person, you can't send them to a Black person's story. It just doesn't make sense, right? Have you ever encountered that? And what do you think?
I haven't encountered that, because I feel like what other stories am I going to tell? It doesn't.
Yeah.
I haven't encountered that, but I'm sure it happens.
Wow. Well, that's so good. Mira, did you have something to say?
I did. I just want to say we've been discussing diversity in the newsroom, and a lot of this comes down to redefining what the concept of objectivity means.
Mm-hmm.
So the scenario you talk about, Randy, is that you can't be objective covering your own community or your own story. Now, this only seems to apply to people of color, minorities, Indigenous communities. No one goes and tells a white guy, we don't think you're objective enough to be covering, politics, which is also full of white guys. No one assumes that there is a kind of problem of objectivity there. The objectivity problem is only an issue with people outside that kind of norm. And it's women, which, I wouldn't even, it's not about minorities. It's just about who's seen as objective. And we have to kind of be open about saying that what many newsrooms see as objective is a kind of very mainstream masculine often position.
Yes.
And so this scenario of who should be telling these stories falls down on the idea that you can't tell these stories because you can't be objective. But then, of course, as you rightly point out, well, other people can't tell these stories because they don't understand, or they don't have the same connections, or on a very, on the quotidian note, they don't have the contacts, they don't have the sources. So you have the access and the and the desire to tell it, and the knowledge of how to tell it, and the trust of the audiences who want to read these stories.
Exactly. And that's how to do it right? That's how you're going, to get the best job done. Absolutely. So I wanted to actually have a conversation quick here about safety on the job. So like I said, as a woman, I have felt my safety threatened at times, not only as a woman, but as an Indigenous woman. Have any of you experienced that? And, what do you do? How do you keep yourself safe on the job? And Leonard, you can chime into this too, just, but Anna, you have a way of checking in with each other sometimes, right? What has been your experience there?
Yeah, so for me, most of my work as a journalist has been from home because of the pandemic. But some of my colleagues in the Okanagan have gone to, community events and rallies and have felt physically unsafe or have been followed or stalked. So that's a conversation that we have brought forward in our newsroom, and across the board, like all of us have experienced some form of either being like followed or sexually harassed. So this is a common thread that all of us experience, both as Indigenous journalists, but also just as Indigenous women. So yeah, we communicate a lot, we check in with each other, and we know as Indigenous peoples that there's always that threat to our lives. Like it's just part of our lived realities, and I'm constantly trying to process it now, especially as the mom of an Indigenous daughter, having to have that conversation with her down the line. I don't know what that looks like yet. But yeah, it's something that we're very real about in our newsroom.
So, when the riots and stuff were happening last year and a little bit this year, but we've seen some journalists that were targeted, in the US during some of the rioting and the protests and demonstrations there. I think that's probably going to keep escalating. I think that those kind of scenarios are going to be come more and more common for us in our jobs. And even, there's been times when I've been out at demonstrations or like pipeline conflicts or different things like that, when you're, put in danger. Leonard, have you ever thought about that and what you would do in those situations? You must have thought about it when you've seen the coverage happening, last year when the journalists were getting their eyes shot and things like that. What are your thoughts on, preparing or the possibility of that, of having to go into that? Like I've had colleagues from APTN, where I used to work, the Aboriginal People's Television Network. They were at Standing Rock, they were tear gassed and, right on the front lines of these major conflicts. But just wondering what your thoughts are on that, Leonard, and would you go out and cover something like that, knowing that you could be in danger?
Personally, yeah, I would be willing to go and cover those kind of things, but also at the same time, I think it goes back to the objectivity question and whether or not I'm the suitable candidate to go on these types of jobs based on some of my previous statements or whatever, and so that's the back to the objectivity question, is that can people like myself report in an objective way when a lot of times people like myself are viewed as activist journalists, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I obviously would, and I try to bring that perspective and bring my perspective and bring my full self to the newsroom, but also to the types of stories that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important. But I would love to do that kind of stuff. I just don't know if I would be assigned that kind of stuff.
Ah. So, Adeline, how do you keep safe on the job?
Well, it's since the murder of George Floyd, I've been doing a lot of behind the scenes work, I guess you can say, in terms of really making change with the Broadcasting Act. Lots of behind the scenes stuff. We're trying to bring people on board, creating capacity, all that other stuff. And with that, when people know who you are and who's doing that work, I've been threatened numerous times. I've had colleagues who have had things sent to their place. And so
Wow.
last year, safety was a big, huge thing for us. And what does that look like? What does that mean for everybody? And that really means just putting on my anti-pants and making sure that people are protected and people are safe as much as I possibly can with whatever power I have. But it's mostly I've been just trying to stay inside. And try to do things quietly. That's one of the things I've been doing, is just try to do things quietly. Because I feel like when you're loud, people will come for you.
Yes.
Can I just say something really quickly?
Yeah.
Adeline, your Zoom lighting is amazing right now.
Thank you.
Yes. She's illuminated. So Mira, I'm just wondering, do you know if are you aware of any training support programs for journalists or anything experiencing trauma? Do you know of anything online or offered somewhere?
The DART Center offers a lot of kind of resources.
What are they called?
DART, the DART Center in New York, as part of Columbia, I think. They offer a lot of resources online. For freelancers, the Rory Peck Trust, again, offers resources and support for journalists online. And there are various foundations are beginning to offer support, but again, it's kind of, the needs are so individual, like each individual needs a different package that really, I think, really the kind of programs you've been describing, where kind of journalists are offered, communities are offered access to counselors so that they can then build their own relationship with the counselor and kind of work through what they need on an individual basis. I think it's really important. I'd like to see more of that as well, but those two are kind of good starting points.
And do you have some advice to offer, journalists, a future outlook? Do you think things will get better? Do you think they'll stay the same for a while?
I think what's interesting, if we talk about COVID-19 in particular, is that we're going, touch wood, and if things go, we're kind of getting vaccine programs roll out, and people are emerging into reality. But I also get the sense we're rushing back into into what we'll do in the real life without having processed what's happened to us in the lockdown and in the pandemic. So I feel there may be a kind of delayed reaction where we kind of think, okay, it's fine, we can go out now, we can go to restaurants, we can get back to the office, and then a year down the line you kind of go, oh my God, what was that? And so I think, and not losing the lessons that we've learned, the kind of things that have been discussed in this panel, look after yourself, take time for yourself, get out into the fresh air, switch off social media at 10 o'clock, don't get into fights. It's really important that we remember this.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'd like to do just a quick round of self-care tips really quick. I know some of you already shared them. I'll share mine. Gosh, self-care would be going outside, leaving my house, which I'm at almost 24/7 in this pandemic, and going for a walk somewhere in nature is really helpful and powerful, and having somebody to talk to, having supports. We can be really isolated where we are, and I'm really good at just being focused and busy on my work, but not having those outside connections, which are so crucial to our well-being, that that is so important to establish those relationships. So let's just give a few little quick bullet pointers from each of us. Self-care tips. Anna.
Take your vitamin D, drink lots
Yes.
of water, and go to bed earlier than you think.
Absolutely. Sleep is key. Sleep is so crucial.
That's the Mama Anna coming through. Drink enough water.
Leonard.
For me, it's like kind of finding the things that you actually like to do, right? And getting out to doing them, if it's reading a book or if it's playing video games. But yeah, checking in with people when you need to, I think, is a big important one. Oftentimes, like, we kind of just push through and we push through and we push through without being like, okay, like, actually I might need to talk to somebody right now, right? And that's something that a lot of people, I think, don't always take into consideration.
Absolutely. Thank you. Adeline.
Yeah, everything Anna and Leonard said. And one of the things that I started doing, because I'm away from home, and so staying connected with some of my relatives back home has been really important to me. So every Sunday I meet with a couple of friends on Sunday through Zoom. We call it Sacred Sunday, where we get up early, have coffee with each other, and just gab about our weeks, whatever it is that we're going through. And
that's special.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. It actually brought us closer. We're way more closer now.
And it's kind of like a breather. It's something you can look forward to, something out of all this, craziness sometimes, right? So yeah, it's a great idea.
Exactly. Yeah. So we just come together and just talk about what we're all going through, because a lot of us are taking up spaces we've never taken up spaces before, and so we're all kind of navigating new experiences. And so coming together and sharing what we're going through. And are we crazy? Is this, is this racist? Those certain things. But yeah, that's been really, really helpful for me. And I have a pandemic puppy as well. She's been really helpful because I'm away from home. And yeah, just being connected to community is my medicine.
Awesome. And Mira, some few more tips from you. And just wondering, actually, I had one question too before that. Should journalists be encouraged to reach out when they're struggling?
Yes, absolutely. In everything we look at, whether it's the issues of media freedom or online attacks or mental health amongst journalists, the key thing that is helpful is solidarity, the ability to kind of support each other, acknowledge each other's problems, and then start to seek help. So absolutely, you must reach out, because you are doing something for yourself, but you're really doing something for the person you're reaching out to, because the chances are they also need some support and some help. And by reaching out, you're kind of creating the path to a conversation that will benefit both of you and everybody else around you. So absolutely do reach out. And it's also very important to kind of remove the stigma from this, to normalize these conversations. And again, have the buy-in from the people that people look up to, the kind of the community leaders, the star journalists, the senior editors, the popular journalists, everybody has these issues. So absolutely. In terms of tips, absolutely. I also have a pandemic puppy, so I fully go with that. And what I found useful is taking advantage of lockdown to figure out what working day works for me. So which hours work to make sure that I'm both productive and rested. And I found that I actually really like waking up with the sun, really like waking up early, just having a coffee and getting some work done, and then stopping and going out for a walk, clearing my head, having something to eat, and then starting with meetings. And it took, this kind of way of working for me to figure that out. And it's been really useful. So I'd like to continue that.
No, that's great. And I recently started implementing that too after having a conversation with a mentor about struggling during the day and having these lapses. And she's like, okay, when are you at your most alert and strongest? Block off that time. So before I would have like a mixture of meetings and classes and assignments and writing, and I would just like chop them up all throughout the day and put them. But now I've made sure to block off all my mornings for specifically writing, because that's when I'm at my most alert, and I work till about noon or 1, take a tiny, a little break, and then I go into my meetings or the classes and stuff. And doing that time blocking has been absolutely incredible. And I'm thinking it's so simple. Like, why didn't I know of this before? But it actually works. Just like if you're more alert or do your best work in the afternoon, then time block to do your most challenging work at that time, and go from there. So absolutely that's awesome. Awesome advice that worked for me. So I just want to remind our viewers to please fill out the survey that is below the video. There's a button to fill out the survey for Journalists for Human Rights. And if you fill it out, you get a $5 Tim's card. So we appreciate you joining us today. Thank you to all the panelists. I think am I handing it over to Sarah now, or how are we working? Are we doing an outro? Am I doing an outro?
We are. Yeah, you can absolutely hand it over to me.
Thank you.
That's where we're at. So again, thank you so much to everybody who has joined us here today, and huge thank you to all of our panelists and our moderator, Brandy, for speaking so honestly about this difficult topic, about something that I think is on everybody's minds, or many people's minds, and it's hard sometimes to get it out of your head and out into the world. So I think you all did a lot of good here today. I'm sure our viewers appreciate it. People who are going to watch this later appreciate it. Like Brandy said, just yet again, another reminder to fill out that survey. It really helps us continue to bring you these opportunities to learn, to interact. Again, it is anonymous. It's good for the $5 Tim's card, and it really supports us. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and have a rest of a lovely Thursday.
Hi, everyone.